Welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to discuss whether you should rent or you should buy. There is absolutely no question that this debate has been going on for decades. It really comes down to a number of different factors, but today I'm going to go through all the pros and cons of each. And yes, as a realtor, I may be slightly biased towards buying a home, but I'm trying to be as objective as possible here today and really focus on what's going to be best for each individual. So without further ado, let's get into it. Make sure you stay until the end because I am going to be breaking down a realistic scenario that should help you decide whether or not you should rent or buy. Now, the numbers aren't going to be perfect to exactly what your situation is, but it should give you some type of idea of what to expect when you buy versus rent and which situation is going to be best for you. So one of the main perks of renting is that anytime something goes wrong with your property, if there's a leak, you need a new faucet, any of those types of issues, call your landlord and you get them to come over and fix it. Now, if you were to own a property, that's not the case. That falls on you no matter how expensive it is, whether it's a $50 plumbing fix or if it's a $1,000, $2,000 fix, that comes out of your pocket. So there is a bit more security on the rental side with all of the unknowns that can happen with home ownership. Another pro on the renting side is that you're not responsible to pay for insurance or property tax. Yes, you should have tenants insurance, but that is dirt cheap compared to actually insuring your home. That falls on the landlord, and if you were to buy a home, that would be an additional expense for you. Where I'm located, that can be an extra $300 to $400 a month depending on the size of your property. Another benefit to renting is the ability to relocate. It's much more difficult to do when you own a house because there's a number of different steps that you need to take in order to move. Having said that, if your lease expires or you give your landlord plenty of notice, it's much easier to relocate from home to home. Now, particularly in your earlier or younger years, it's a lot easier to share costs when you're renting. Now, you may get a 3-bedroom unit and have a couple of buddies stay in the other 2 bedrooms and you all split the cost 3 ways. And that is a very, very common thing to do. Now, if you're to own a home, it's a little bit more complicated to do that because one person would be on the mortgage. And yes, you're welcome to have your buddies stay with you. It's a little bit more difficult to separate those costs evenly. Therefore, I do think that's a perk for renting. Now, this is easily the largest perk of renting compared to owning a property, and that is closing costs. I will be doing a detailed breakdown later on in the video, so make sure to stay until the end, but there is a huge difference between the two. When you go to rent a property, you may have to give a security deposit and maybe first and last month's rent, but that is pennies on the dollar compared to what you have to do when you buy a house. You're required to do a down payment, typically a deed transfer tax, lawyer fees, inspections. There's a whole host of other upfront costs that can be expensive, so sometimes people just don't have the funds to have that down payment ready to buy a home, and that's what ends up being the decision maker for them to rent instead. Okay, now let's look at the pros of owning a property versus renting. Now, number one is you get to build equity. Every time you make a mortgage payment, you are building equity and paying down that house. When you go to rent and pay your landlord or your property manager, that doesn't go anywhere. That is money out of your pocket and it does not get you further ahead down the line. So that is a massive component of why people choose to buy real estate. 90% of millionaires own real estate, so clearly there's a recipe to success there. Now, to piggyback off the previous point, you are forced to save when you own a house. You have to make a mortgage payment every month, otherwise the bank isn't going to be too happy with you. The flip side, when you're renting, you're not in control of that. You're not building wealth creation. Rents may rise year over year, and that's not a good recipe for long-term success. This next key point is something that's often forgot about when comparing renting and owning. When you own a property, you have full creative control over how you want to design your house and what renovations you want to do. When you're renting, you have to run pretty much everything by your landlord, even paint color or hanging a shelf, and that can be very tedious and not really make it feel like a home. On the flip side, you also have full control when it comes to owning the property. Nobody's going to be knocking down your door telling you that you have to move, unless of course you don't make those mortgage payments that we just talked about. Whereas if a landlord wants to take possession of their property back or they're selling it, you're put into a very uncomfortable situation very quickly and really can uproot your life as a whole. Now, my last point is there are tax implications when owning versus renting, and make sure to check your local jurisdiction to verify because I am speaking in Canada and I am not an accountant. This is not financial advice, but there are tax benefits to owning a house versus renting one. All right, it's time to get into the real life scenario example of breaking down whether you should rent or you should buy. Before we do that, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button, make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon so you can be notified anytime I release new content. I'm a new channel, but I plan on being here for a long time and I'd really appreciate your support. Okay, as mentioned before, I am a real estate agent in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is on the east coast of Canada. So I am a little bit biased towards home ownership, but I hope you found that this was a fair video and trying to be as objective objective as possible, and that's what this scenario is going to look like. Now, the numbers may be different in your area, but hopefully this presents a real life scenario that can be relatable to your situation. It's also important to note that I am a small scale real estate investor. I do own a couple of properties and do have tenants. Therefore, I do understand the side of renting and wouldn't have much of a business if there weren't renters out there and I just convinced everyone to buy real estate. So one important piece to note before we break down the numbers is that if you are in a current situation where you're renting and you're paying well below market rent, do not uproot your lives just because you watch this video. Make sure to stay there, save your money, do whatever's best for you and your family. Otherwise, if you are in a spot where you're paying a lot for rent, this video may be for you. Now, when breaking down these numbers, I'm going to be using 3-bedroom houses or apartments, as well as a 3-bedroom house on the purchase side, so that we're comparing apples to apples. Okay, in this scenario, I'm going to be looking at a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house for $2,000 a month plus all of the utilities. And then on the buy side, I'm going to be comparing that with a $300,000 house, which can buy you a condo, a small fixer-upper, or a semi-detached in and around my neighborhood. Now, on the rent side, it's going to be pretty basic because you are still paying for all of your utilities minus the property tax and home insurance that I spoke about earlier. So that will be extra on top of the home side, but all things being equal, we will still be paying for utilities on both sides. So let's say you purchase a $300,000 home with current market conditions and current mortgage rates. That would put you at a $1,655 a month mortgage payment at 4.59% interest on a 5-year fixed mortgage. On top of that, we're going to ballpark about $125 for insurance and $250 a month for property tax. As mentioned, those are going to be 2 additional expenses that you're going to incur as a homeowner compared to when you're just renting. Now, this last piece is also going to be exempt from renting because it's home maintenance, and that would fall on the landlord or property manager on the renting side, but I'm budgeting $100 a month for the home side. That may seem high or low to some people. And the reality of owning a home is you may go a year or 2 without anything major happening, but then you may need a new roof or have a severe leak that happens, and that's where you'd have that budgeted money set aside ready to pay for that expense. Okay, so tallying up all of those costs, that leaves us with $2,130 a month on the house side versus renting an apartment. It's $130 more on this side, but reminder that this is building equity. Not all of that is going straight towards down paying your property, but a good chunk of it is. And when you go to sell this property or maybe refinance, you have that built-in equity that can help you with your retirement, travel, education, anything along those lines. And that's why so many people choose to buy a home instead of rent. Now, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the closing costs with buying a house, which are removed and exempt when you rent. So on the buying side, you're looking at closing costs of about $22,000 to $23,000 on this house. And that's in Canada at a 5% down payment, but we also have a deed transfer tax, which varies depending on your municipality. You're looking at lawyer fees, title transfer, title insurance, and a host of other smaller closing costs. So that is the main difference when it comes to buying versus renting. So when push comes to shove, this piece is really what usually makes or breaks people's decisions on whether they should buy or rent, because not everyone has $25,000 sitting in a bank account ready to make a purchase. Having said that, on the rent side, in this scenario I just gave you, there's a difference of about $130 depending on affordability. That means that you can put that money towards a savings, and maybe you have to rent for the next 2, 3, 4 years, but then you have enough savings ready to go out and buy your very first property. Now, in conclusion, I am a fan of buying real estate. I think it's the best way to set yourself up long-term for success, and it does give you more stability. Having said that, there are plenty of scenarios out there which makes most sense to rent, and I don't want people uprooting their lives just because they think they need to buy a home. If it doesn't fit your lifestyle, if it doesn't fit your budget, and you're happy where you're at, then stay there. There's no need to go buy a home just for the sake of saying you can. However, if you do have the savings and you do have the inclination to own a property, I encourage you to talk to a local realtor, a local mortgage broker, and get started on the process, because it is the best way for setting you up for success in the long run. I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification icon. I'd love to have you join this team.